Our next guest has recently resigned as a GP over the UK government's handling of COVID. Dr. Dave Cartland said he tried to raise legitimate concerns about the virus and vaccine safety, but was ignored. He also says the way the COVID situation has been managed in the UK has been abhorrent and the NHS is not fit for purpose. He joins us now. Dr. Cartland, thank you so much for joining us. You've walked away from a very successful career as a GP. That must have been a really difficult decision for you.
Yeah, and it's not a decision that I've taken lightly, really. It's been a decision that's been, I've got to it over a 2-year process, really, from the beginning of the COVID pandemic all the way through. I've been on a period of observation, really, of how we've been handling, or should I say, mishandling things in the COVID pandemic, really. So, yeah, I mean, I've took a lot of years of my life to get to the position that I'm in. I've been working as a doctor for 14 years, and prior to that, I've done, 2 degrees, research year where I published medical research as well. So it's took me 10 years of training. So, collectively a good 24 years of I'm not going to say how old I am, but 24 years of a sort of young life.
You look good for it. You look a darn sight younger than me. You wrote a very powerful 11-page testimony. It's on your Twitter, where you laid out your concerns that you'd had with people, that you'd raised them and that you were ignored with these concerns. What were the particular concerns about the last 2 years that really got to you?
Yeah, I mean, I split it up really into sort of 2 years. The first year, like any human, I'm subject to the same signals as everybody else. And what I mean by that is, all the media narrative that's coming at us all. And like I say, that goes from nurses, doctors, members of the public, parents. We're all hearing the same thing. But, I just remember that first year, I was just picking up very early signals, really, of things not being as bad as we were led to believe in terms of, one of my other jobs aside from being a GP is an A&E doctor and an out-of-hours doctor. So, we're expecting, bodies piling up in the streets. We're expecting people, dropping down left, right and centre. Never quite happened that way. I just remember back then it was never a busy period in my career. GP is generally very busy, but I wasn't really seeing those people that were coughing their lungs up essentially and being really poorly with a COVID-sounding illness. And then the second half of it has really been about just spotting, consistencies in terms of just seeing lots of evidence that the vaccines aren't doing what they say on the tin, for starters. And what I mean by that is that vaccines should be doing 2 things, really. They should be stopping you from catching a disease in the area of vaccines. They should stop you from catching and spreading. The second thing they should be doing also is stopping you becoming personally unwell. And the ultimate unwell is death, I guess. And then the third thing is really you need it to be safe. And that across the sort of last 12 months of the period has been where the main concerns come, as that we're just not really responding to signals of harm, as I called them in that article. And my ability to raise these concerns has been stifled somewhat. To say that having some form of engagement, debate on these matters in an open forum of local colleagues or regional colleagues or anywhere, really, you get shut down. And we're talking safety issues here and things that you spotted, links to vaccine injuries. No one really can talk about vaccine injuries openly without feeling that they're going to be shut down. And, the back end of this period, the last 2 years, I've seen lots of examples of, potential, and I'm not saying they are vaccine injuries, but potential vaccine injuries in people that just haven't been right, Gareth. They just haven't been right since the jabs, whether it's the second jab, the first jab. They've just not been right from, like I say, just generally not feeling as energetic as they were to death. And, to be able to call, and everything in between in that spectrum, I've seen everything from strange skin conditions, strange neurological presentations, massive increases in cancer referrals, just generally, and not COVID, that's the thing, it's not been COVID that I've seen. And, we're dealing with a very different, beast at the moment in terms of Omicron, and that's not really been acknowledged by the consensus of the medical profession, that Omicron is so very, very different, very much more mild in terms of its symptoms. And so the final nail for me was really, aside from the NHS mandate, was the fact that children, the children have been kind of clumped together with generally unwell people. The data's out there, really, Gareth. It's out there that the people that have died of COVID are either elderly, they've got comorbidities, several comorbidities, usually around the heart and lungs anyway. And they're usually generally overweight and unhealthy folk. So, I think the recent data set I saw from the Freedom of Information Act said that the average age of death from COVID within 28 days, as I said, was 2 years higher than the average lifespan of a male, for example, which is just bizarre. And they're vaccinating our children based upon this very simple piece of data.
It is extraordinary. That's something that I found extraordinary from the beginning, was that average age of death, and how that never really seemed to enter into any conversation about anything. I mean, so you've raised these legitimate concerns with colleagues. I'm assuming, obviously, if you're seeing these, potential vaccine injuries and deaths and stuff, they must be as well. So why do you think that they're not interested in having a conversation about it?
It's a really interesting question, and if I knew the answer to that, I would have probably tried to address it more, because I felt that this is what I keep saying to people: you need to realise that after all that training, all of those years' experience, what has it taken for Dr. Cartland to come to this decision of leaving that profession? Got a decent life down here in Cornwall, 2.5 days of work, clinical work, 4.5 days a week. What's his doctor seen, heard, witnessed? What has he been unable to share with his colleagues and feel that he's been heard? That's led him to resign. I've had many conversations with many doctors, colleagues, even up country, that you can't have that engagement. They just shut you down and they call you names, and you just ask for the data. If you've got the old science of debating and discussing and rebutting each other's argument, it seems to have gone out of the window. And people are just quite rude about it. They've got to that response where, rather than engage, they'll just call you a name and walk away, or block you, or call you a COVID idiot, etc., etc. It's a very bizarre psychology, and I can't explain it, Gareth, in complete honesty.
I wonder how much of that, because I see quite a lot of that on social media as well, is almost buyer's remorse a bit, because these people were told, as you were told and I was told, this is safe and effective, it's going to stop you getting it, stop you spreading it. People have gone and had 3 of these things, and now, well, no, actually, it doesn't do any of those things.
It's quite a good way of putting it, but buyer's remorse, exactly that. And these people that have been sort of jabbing, it's been a conveyor belt of jabbing in cohorts, getting ever younger, ever healthier. And you should see it in action, Gareth. It literally is like a conveyor belt of hundreds of people, one after the other being injected. There's a whole area around consent. What I've been witnessing in the vaccination clinics is that there's certainly very cursory consent being sought. People, even now after 3 jabs, don't know what they've had. They don't know what it consists of. They don't know it's a novel technology. They don't know how to report safety concerns. That's all part of a valid consent. But the flip side of that is, if you don't want it after you've been fully informed, that's equally valid. And we were seeing that with the NHS scenario. People were being bullied, coerced, call it what you like. Nurses and doctors were set to lose their job. They still may do in the future, but that aside, it's just absolutely absurd and abhorrent. That's the word I've used, that we're actually considering. And even today, hearing in the media that we've got 5 to 11s are in the crosshairs of the vaccinators now. And it's very easy, I've said in previous interviews, Gareth, it's very easy to disperse these crowds of baying anti-vaxxers, if you like. Just give them the data. Very quick, very easy. Give them the safety data. If it's there, you're that confident enough to jab not infants, but young people, down to the age of 5, then give them the safety data. All patients want is the reassurance. They trust their doctor. They trust them implicitly with their life and their children, etc. And they just want that confidence to come from their doctors, rather than just be blankly unengaged with. It's a very bizarre phenomenon, like you say. Buyer's remorse is a very good way of putting it, really, because they've been doing this from the beginning of and they can't unjab people now. So they kind of have to justify it.
I do wonder that if there is an element of guilt almost on people's part, that if you have to acknowledge that actually maybe there is a problem, then that would be a struggle to look in the mirror. If you think, well, how many have I done? How many have I tallied?
A little disclaimer: I've not jabbed anyone, just to put that out there.
I do, yeah. I mean, it's interesting you say about informed consent, of course, because I've had surgeries in my life. I broke my leg and stuff, and I remember going in and the surgeon talking me through it and saying, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, and me being like, well, what's the chances of that? And it's minuscule. It's 0.000 whatever. And I'm almost thinking, God, you're making me more nervous, but he has to tell me. But then when it comes
you know, what we think is a good thing as a doctor. You know, there's best interest principles around that. But you know, somebody's dying of an appendectomy, they need of an appendicitis, they need an appendectomy. But at the same time, I have to talk to them and say, look, you know, it might kill you. You might have a general anaesthetic. It might be a 1 in 10,000, for example, chance of a general anaesthetic reaction or a failed intubation. But they still need to know that, and they're within their rights. If they're not happy, you know, it depends on what they feel their odds are, and their risk assessment, really. But they're allowed to say no. The example I use is Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. They refuse blood, and when I was an A&E doctor prior to being a GP, you know, you couldn't give them blood, and you know that may or may not be the right reason in terms of, you can debate, you know, what the Bible says about taking blood transfusions, but ultimately they've made a conscious advanced decision not to have that treatment. And I've seen Jehovah's Witnesses die on the resusc because you can't give them that life-saving blood. Cancer patients choose, you know, quality over quantity. Now, all I can really do is, you know, counsel them in both directions. And if they choose for quality and turn down chemotherapy and all the side effects therewith, they're absolutely within their rights, except a COVID shot.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to be the only thing, isn't it? Like I say, like you get this informed consent for everything, no matter how much how minuscule the chances of a reaction might be. Yet on the other hand, you've got Pfizer, for instance, trying to lock away their safety data for 75 years, which isn't going to fill anyone with any kind of confidence. It's
I mean,
insane.
the safety data that is there that they're not locking away is pretty damning, to be honest. The stuff that you do see, and it's Pfizer's own documentation of, you know, figures of harm and death in their small studies. I mean, massive compared to the fact that, you know, swine flu vaccination, for example, killed, you know, double figures, 50, I think the figure was, and they stopped it. They pulled the vaccination. You know, how many deaths is it going to take off, you know, healthy adults? How many children with myocarditis will it take? You know, it's almost like we haven't had enough until we reach a threshold. Then we'll think about it. I'm here to tell you now that those things are happening. You know, up and down the country, doctors and nurses are aware of these cases, but they're petrified. You know, they're petrified, Gareth, of the repercussions of speaking out. The only reason I can is because I've had to cancel myself and quit the profession, which is a pretty sad state of affairs.
Yeah, but it took incredible courage to do that, mate. Like, I have to say, like 24 years of doing something, 10 years of training, that's you know.
But at the same time, Gareth, I would say this, you know, I took an oath, the same as every other doctor. And I've just reminded my colleagues on social media of a couple of things. There's an area called good medical practice. Ironically, it's a GMC guidance on it, and also on valid consent and capacity. I think it's bizarre. It's gone out of the window. You know, this good medical practice is around, you know, making your patient your prime concern. I'm very sort of, the buzzword from that article, I think you've read it, haven't you? That it's primum non nocere, which is firstly do no harm. Yeah. You know, we don't want to harm patients. We're there to advocate and to offer them. And, you know, in that process of consent and concordance, we reach an agreement. That's what it used to be, particularly as GPs. And that's in every consultation that we do. You know, you reach a partnership.
What do you feel it's about? I mean, that's a tough question to ask, because it's almost like, you know, you're not privy to you know, what goes on in boardrooms and meetings of people that are way further up the ladder than me and you, but it doesn't make sense. And so it's obviously human nature for people like me and you to like try and make sense of this insanity. What do you feel it's about?
Yeah, good question. We can but speculate. And I think the next few weeks are going to be very interesting, because the data I'm surrounded by, I mean surrounded, almost drowning in, it's categoric. It's beyond all reasonable doubt, and you can't hide from that data for much longer. You know, it's going to be, well, we shall see. I think there's impending, very interesting things happening, and I'll keep it at that.
Yeah, I think a lot of what's happening as well is that the anecdotal stuff is happening in people's lives. So like you're saying, your colleagues are seeing stuff now that maybe they weren't before, and also, you know, I feel like it's been happening for a while. People's life experience is kind of coming up above safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, which is just being repeated constantly. And it's like, well, actually, no, because I know X, Y, and Z has happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some really strange paradoxes in that, you know, everything I say and do, I have to back with data. You know, that's just good science, isn't it? But it doesn't seem to work the other way. So the government can spout off things like, you know, I heard an advert earlier about have your booster if you're pregnant, it will give you an 8 times less chance of dying of Omicron, actually, interestingly. That's just nonsense. I don't know where they plucked that from. But there's no reference to any data. When you hear them speaking in the House of Commons, there's no reference to data sets, studies. It's because they don't exist. Simple as that. And if they do exist, show them to me. I've called out Sajid myself, you know, and anyone who would like to speak, any colleague, nurse, doctor, any pro-vaxxers, I'm pro-vaxxer, just I'm not pro, jab number 7 of COVID, particularly in kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Cartland, and thanks for talking out, and thanks for taking the stance that you've taken, because it's taken a hell of a lot of courage, and it must have been like a roller coaster for you the last couple of weeks.
It's been a roller coaster, but when you get off a roller coaster, it's a good feeling, isn't it? You feel good, and it does feel that I've had a really good feeling. My conscience is clear, and that's the final thing I would say, that there are colleagues out there that are complicit. They know what they're doing. They know that they're lacking the data behind what they're doing. And the second thing is, those doctors, I would really appeal to, those nurses that are seeing these things, even anonymously. You need to raise the signal, you need to raise the alarm, because there are lives at risk here. I would go so far as to say that there are lives at risk. The amount of harm that these jabs are causing are just off the scale. And everyone knows somebody, and there's lots of groups going around on social media, Telegram, and they're full of cases, full of stories of harm, and kids that have dropped down dead, young people dropping in their sleep, stuff that you never heard of. Myocarditis was a completely obsolete thing in anyone around puberty or prepubescence, and now we're seeing what? Multitudes. It's incredible stuff.
Yeah, it's horrific. But thank you so much for talking out again, and thanks for coming on right now. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Gareth.